Welcome to the Conscious Dominance Podcast, where Andrew and Eric, two dominant men in dom-sub relationships, discuss how we approach our dominant roles from a conscious and loving place, and what we learn about ourselves through the deep intimacy that these power exchange dynamics make possible. Sit back and enjoy the show. Eric, it's good to talk to you.
Good to see you, Andrew. Good to talk to you.
Right before we hit record, I like the way you brought this up. You said that this conversation is going to be like us going on a walk through the woods, unpacking this topic of conversation, and the thing that you brought to me today, which is this idea of feminine competence. And, essentially when we're leading a woman, when we're in a relationship with a woman who is a very strong, competent woman, what do we do with that competence when she also wants to be submissive, to surrender, to let go? So I would kind of love to hear from you, like, what is it that made this topic one that you wanted to discuss and unpack here?
Yes, it's in many ways, it is sort of a central issue when you have let me just say, for me, it's been something that I've really had to confront and see and to navigate and to untangle and to hold myself within. And let me back up a little bit and kind of set the stage, because I think that would be helpful.
Yeah.
My woman, Rachel, she's a very competent human being. Like, she has been, I'm the first person that she has completely surrendered. And as she said, put more than a toe into the relationship. She has been very much the person that has held down and held herself emotionally. She has started and run a successful business. She's quite competent when it comes to cooking, when it comes to money, when it comes to food, she's an incredible fisher woman. Like, she can fish like nobody's business. She can fix things. Like, she's competent. She's competent and
Skilled.
like skilled in many different directions. And she's very competent when it comes to the bedroom. She's a competent communicator. She's a competent human being. And on paper and in general, for a lot of men, they're like, fuck yeah, that's awesome. Like, isn't that awesome that your woman can do all these things? And it's great. And then, okay, on a certain front, there are times that that's really helpful and that's really beautiful. And there's another part of this. And this has been this whole evolution for me, is to witness her and her competence, and for me to see there and sit. For the first part of our relationship, I actually was unconscious of the relationship between competence and how it played out in the relationship. And for the feminine, she's also a very feminine woman. And I would see her get stressed, and I would see her feeling a lot of overwhelm, and started watching and witnessing. And through listening to her and through being around her, realized that just because she was competent at something did not mean she enjoyed doing it, or that it nurtured her or nourished her. And this became something that was revelatory for me, because as a man, if I'm good at something, I get satisfaction from the doing of it. If I can do something well and start to finish a project and I do it well, I get satisfaction from it. And for her, it was a revelation to her that I could find, that I equated her competency with her enjoyment of it. And I assumed that because she was good at these things, that she liked doing them or wanted to be doing them, or was just, that it energized her or rejuvenated her. And this was a big Revelation, as we became and kind of, we were very much a sort of DS in the bedroom, but as we moved that outside of the bedroom and into our life, we had to take an inventory of our life to really see how all these things played out. And for me to witness her in her, one of the main things that I had to kind of confront and see was the fact that I wanted to, as I was to lead that, I was witnessing someone who was more competent than I was in many of these areas. And so for me, I had to come to this place of being like, who was I to lead her or to direct things, or to even, if she wasn't going to do it and I was going to do it, it was almost like we went backwards because she's better at it than I was. The cooking is a great example. She's going to just cook all the meals. There isn't time for her to do all these things. I'm not as good a cook. So the competency, as it's not black and white. It's not something that is all good or all bad. It's complex. There's layers to it, and there's a time and a place for it. And I think the main place for it for me just is to first of all bring awareness to it, to bring consciousness to it, to witness it, to witness how certain places it was rejuvenating to her, gave her life, and certain places it was taking away life, that competency. And which ones, if I wanted her in a more feminine, surrendered space, it would make sense that I would sort of relieve her of these things.
Right.
So anyway, I'd like to hand it over to you. There's a lot more I could say to that, but that's sort of a beginning space of this.
Yeah. And, my relationship to that is very different because it was it was a very long, long time that I saw Dawn's competence, her strength, her ability to navigate and manage things on her own. I saw this for a long time as something she was really good at. That's something she was very able to do, and that absolutely stripped her of her aliveness. And this is the phrase that I used with her a lot was, just because you can doesn't mean that it's good for you.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that it's healthy for you.
Mm-hmm.
And letting go of the attachment to be the one in charge or in control is such a challenging thing because this ability to basically take care of yourself is something that's programmed into women. I can't tell you how many women we've worked with who were coached and trained by their mothers. Never rely on a man. Always
Right.
be able to take care of yourself.
Right. That was her.
And
Right.
and but at the same time, I don't think I've ever coached or worked with a woman who didn't feel like she was burned out, like she was exhausted, like she was at the end
Mm-hmm.
of her rope and just completely broken. But then at the same time, the only potential solution they see to that is to try harder, to do
Yeah.
more, like to
Yeah.
go even harder in the direction of what's killing them, as if killing yourself more is going to somehow set you free.
Right.
So, yeah, this really is where Dawn read a really interesting thing when we were on our last road trip. She read this out loud to me because she wanted to look at what does the oracle really mean? This is a term that gets used a lot by women who are trying to live in their feminine and they want to do this feminine embodiment thing, and they hear the feminine is the oracle. And so they go like, down this path of, oh, I'm the oracle. I'm the one who knows everything. And so I get to have everything my way because I'm the oracle. And what was really interesting is hearing the stories that she was reading about the oracle at Delphi, which was this mythological um, woman who was the one who the kings and the gods went to for advice. But her advice was always cryptic.
Mm-hmm.
And it did rely on someone who is able to see the truth in the oracle.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is what I really see is what starts to make, again, we depend on each other. We count on each other, man and woman, dominant,
Mm-hmm.
submissive, masculine, feminine. We need each other.
Mm-hmm.
We really do. We can't do this alone. We're not made to do it alone. And so a competent woman who's trying to do everything without needing a man, without relying on a man, without counting on a man, is at the same time creating independence and separating herself from
Mm-hmm.
what often she really craves the most, which is to be able to let go
Mm-hmm.
and to be free.
Right. It's true. And I think a lot of that competence comes from a need and a desire, like we all have, for safety. I
Mhm.
think a lot of times women become really good at things so that they feel safer. They become safer on the sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And there's a degree of that with men, but that's not what drives us. We're not going out in the world attempting to feel safer. This is not necessarily a driving factor for men, unless you're in a sort of a place that is dangerous. But for most men, this is not, we don't wake up thinking about safety.
Not
I
physical
remember,
safety.
not physical safety. Yeah. And I think a lot of women, physical safety, emotional safety, financial safety, all of these things are real driving factors of competence. And so it's a different um, kind of that need for that container. If they're the ones creating that, then the man comes into the situation and is like, oh, you're good. You're good, Bo. You don't need me.
Mhm.
Because a man ultimately wants to come in and feel needed, right? We want to feel needed. And so this base level that we have a space, there has to be space for us. And if we're going to lead her and she's already competent in all these different areas, why would she need our leadership if she's good? She's good in this. So there
Well,
has to be this space. Go ahead.
and then if she is putting that competence out as the um like the leading factor in her womanhood, in who she is, like I can do everything all by myself. Who's she going to be most attractive to? Someone who wants everything done for him.
Exactly. And this is the thing that Rachel, I didn't know she was so competent because she wasn't presenting as competent. I mean, she wasn't presenting as not competent, but this was not her. So this was an interesting, like, she's an interesting kind of case study because she was somebody who has really been on a journey of her own feminine space and surrendered space. And it's quite like incredibly surrendered and submissive in her space. And yet the competence is still so much a part of who she is and how she is and how she interacts, and sort of sifting through the parts that, okay, like this part is helpful, this part not helpful, is really like a sorting and a sifting kind of quality of like, and here's the time when we need to kind of be in this space where I need you to be show up really competent, and we're parallel doing this, sort of like that Navy SEAL moment where you take it from here because you're really good in this one area, and then I'll follow you in this directive kind of area. That's very necessary. We see that play out in our relationship. But it's been a real journey for me to come to terms with my own insecurities around not being as competent as she is in a lot of these areas. And so that's been a really wonderful opportunity for me to find a deeper resonance with what it is to be a leader. Being a leader is not necessarily being the one who's the most competent at all of the tasks that are underneath them. And this is obviously in the workforce. You hire people that are better at the thing underneath you than you are. You get a bookkeeper because they're better at bookkeeping than you are. You get someone who does design because they're a designer than you. It's the same in our life. But if you have a woman that's here and she's better at all these things, you don't want her at the same time doing all those things because it tires her out. So this is where the path of kind of sorting and sifting is really an interesting sort of discussion, because you're not, yes, it's hot, that idea of a slave, but to a point. You don't want to, you want a life-giving slave. You want someone who's vital and alive and surrendered in a
Exactly.
space of enthusiasm and exaltation and divinity. You don't want someone who's exhausted and at their wits' end and breaking. That's not going to work over the long term. So there has to be this regenerative quality to it. And that can only come when you're able to kind of sift through these different parts. Okay, this place gives life. This place does not give life. And you have to pay attention. And she doesn't even necessarily know that at first. You have to see this and kind of pay attention to this, you know.
Yeah. I love the way you said that. And I'd love to talk a little bit about, this is one of the places that's so interesting about the difference between where Dawn and I are at versus where you and Rachel are at, because us being 5.5 years into this deeper exploration of dominance and submission and consciousness and everything, we've we have gone through a lot of this, the stuff that you two are in the midst of going through, being newer in relationship with each other. So I'd love to talk a little bit about how I've gone about that sifting, as you said, that seeing. And I'd love to hear how you are going about it. And maybe we can even learn something from each other here in
Yeah.
this. But I want to start with where you ended, which was seeing what makes her come alive. And this is where what she feels and what she thinks can be such different things. And where a lot of women who are trying to live in the embodiment of their femininity, what they're really looking for, whether they know it or not, is to be able to be out of their heads, to live in their bodies, to be able to just feel okay being in the present moment, and to feel comfortable and safe regardless of what goes on around them. And they aren't necessarily built to know the difference between what's for them and what's not.
Mm-hmm.
Because competence can come from skill, but it can also come from essentially self-denial. It can come from the ability that she may have cultivated in herself to shut herself off from her own experience, from her own truth,
Mm-hmm.
and to act in contradiction to what's right for her,
Mm-hmm.
which is a skill she could, and many women have developed. It's a skill Dawn developed very well.
Mm-hmm.
She got very good at doing all of the things that were really destructive to her own highest expression, her
Mm-hmm.
greatest joy.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I've had to do over time is to pay attention not to what she thinks she likes, not to what she says she is good at or what she says makes her feel good,
Mm-hmm.
but to really, when I feel her vibrating with the energy of eros, of aliveness, of turn on,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because her body speaks the truth to me.
Mm-hmm.
Her mouth doesn't always speak the truth to me. Her head,
Mm-hmm.
her thoughts don't always speak the truth to me, but her body
Mm-hmm.
speaks the truth to me.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where we have to be so tuned into our sensitivity as a man,
Mm-hmm.
because I can feel the difference when she's locked up in her head, when she's
Mm-hmm.
stuck in her thoughts. I can feel compared to when she's at peace,
Mm-hmm.
joyful, free, alive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this is where, for me, dominance has been all about saying no to her, doing the things that make her feel stuck in her head, that make her feel more shut down, and
Mm-hmm.
creating life for her where she can live doing the things that make her come alive.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that means saying, even though you were really good at that thing, you're not going to do it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Either I'm going to do it, we're going to hire it, whatever it might
Mm-hmm.
be. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter if you're good at it. What matters is that you get to live a life of aliveness and freedom
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
above all else.
Mm-hmm.
Because to me, that's the truth.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we are. That's how we're deciphering what's true for her rather than what she
Mm-hmm.
thinks is true, what she thinks is right.
Mm-hmm.
It's how we feel her
Mm-hmm.
experiencing life.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how I have over time paid attention to what's really for her versus what is she just competent at but actually burns her out versus what is she not competent at but is trying to force herself to do because she thinks she's supposed to or she thinks she has to.
Mm-hmm.
And going through that process and her being willing to follow me, frankly, because that's, I can see this all I want. She has to be willing to let go of control when I see a place where she would be better off if she let go.
Mm-hmm.
She has to be willing. But doing this over a period of years and years and years is where now I see her living. I've never seen, known, or met a woman who feels so vibrant and so
Mm-hmm.
alive and so free in my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the process that I've worked through. And I continue to work through because these things never really end. But how is that for you in the ways that you try to see what is right and lead in your own relationship?
Yeah, I think I relate to what you're saying, and I feel like there's a lot of crossover. I would also add, I think another part of this for me has really been where if you mentioned this word attuned, and I think that's a really, I want to stress that word, that I almost feel like there's like when you're attuned is your capacity to feel into yourself, feel into her, and feel into the moment. So it's like you're simultaneously attuning to three different situations: the situation and what that calls for, her response and where she's at, and then you in that moment. And I have found that when I get this word trigger, we use this word, or whoosh, or flush, or activated, or whatever. I think most men spend most of their life in some degree of trigger. It's some degree of wish. It's some degree of proving energy, some degree of neediness, some degree that's like that, and they're unconscious of it, that they're not truly acting from a place that's clean. They're not energetically clean. And they don't realize that their woman's competence, they're doing something that they're not as good at, literally triggers them. It literally makes them realize they're like, oh shit, I'm not as good. And then they and that becomes a thing. And so if you're not able to just witness what's happening in your body and in her and in this and kind of take in the information, you're not just taking in the information of her and her response to it, you're also taking in your own information. And it's a long game. This is not a short game. This is because what's going to happen in this is there are going to be times where you're going to realize you suck at something. And when you start playing this game out, you realize and you become face to face where all the places that I feel incompetent. I have never been more aware of my incompetence in my life than I have been with her. And yet I've never been more competent in my life than I have been with her. I have never been more conscious. The thing about coming into consciousness or into awareness is that you become aware of your shortcomings. And that is overwhelming. And especially
It's
in
uncomfortable.
contrast, it's very uncomfortable. And especially in contrast to a woman who, where you've got these shortcomings, she's really strong on, and you're supposed to lead that. And yet, how are you? And if you're going to take that off of her plate and do it yourself, it feels like you're going backwards in some ways. And that there may be a period that feels like you're going backwards. I'm an astrologer, and one of the things that people talk about is retrograde energy, and Mercury retrograde. And this is an idea, and we can think of this as just forget about astrology and just think about it as a time where there's a planning period, or there's a reassessment period, or a recalibration. And another way I think of the retrograde energy is integrating. You've learned something new and you've got to apply it to the old way. And so you got to merge these two things together. And so that quality of merging, taking something from past knowledge or new awareness, new learning, and then bringing it to the combining the two, this sort of recalibration, this new place. That's a growing curve. That's going to take you. You're not going to be as efficient. You're not going to be as fast. You're not going to be as productive during these periods of time. And that's truly the mark of maturity, and the mark of something that lasts is your capacity to take in new information, new modes, and adjust to those and utilize them and let go of the old. But there's a period of time there that's it's an uncomfortable period, kind of a growing period. That quality is a lot of what these relationships, you have to be able to build those into the structure of the relationship, where it's not just about you doing fast, go. We're very clear about what's happening. This is our system. This is the way it is. These are the rules. This is the dictate. This is the authority. That quality is not a long-term sustainable quality when you have somebody who's a woman who's very competent, where you could learn from that woman, you could grow from her. She's got something to offer you that you need to learn, but you've got to go through your own insecurities. And how do you bring those on board and listen to them, readjust, move this, adjust? This is the story. And most men can't handle that. They can't handle being around a woman who's more competent than them. They can't handle a woman who makes more money than them, or is better in the quote unquote more experienced in the bedroom than them, or is better at fishing than them, or better at fixing a car. Any number of things.
Brings up all of this defense energy, this
Defense,
defensiveness.
insecurity energy, and all this stuff. And so for me, I have had to learn, well, what is my worth? What is my competence? What is my value? And truly, it is my value, and my strength is to remain and to be able to hold myself in my trigger. It's, as you say, to be untriggerable. Like it's to somebody to say, where's my orgasm? This is not what she says, but if somebody were to say something like, where's my orgasm? Or you're not meeting me sexually, like in the midstream, to not get triggered, to be like, it's coming, or or whatever the thing that's being thrown at you, you don't get flushed into that triggered state. And when you can remain out of that and you can remain fresh, you become anti-fragile. You become somebody who's able to learn something and to grow quickly and to be in a learning state of mind constantly. So you don't see feedback as a negative thing. You see feedback as an opportunity to grow and to move forward. And most men take feedback, or the feminine, as an indictment on who they are and their relationship and their capacity to be a man. And you should be more appreciative, and they get defensive, and I'm the man, and their sense of identity is tied into their competence. And when your sense of identity is tied into your competence, you become fragile, because truly your competence as a man is not in the skill sets that you have, but it is in your capacity to remain present, your capacity to be conscious of your capacities, to be aware of her energy, your energy, and the situation. If you can constantly be aware of your energy, her energy, and the situation, that's the mastery that she's seeking. She's not needing you to be able to do every fucking thing out there. It's helpful to be able to have skills, but it's not imperative for you to have all these skills. You pick and choose the skills that you're interested in, that light you up. And first and foremost, though, you must have the skill to remain conscious, to be aware, to be alert. And it truly is like being a samurai or being a Zen, master. There's that quality to it where you are in that, that's the quality that we're trying to evoke here.
Friend of mine who's a kung fu master and teacher talks about being like water, and like whenever something upsets you, just calming back down like the water calms itself back out,
Mm-hmm.
finding your level again. You said
And
something that reminded me of a conversation I just had yesterday about we have to be able to stay grounded enough to learn the lessons that are present for us in a situation. Because if we're in that triggered state, if we're activated because we feel insecure or because she's better at something than us or whatever the reason is, if we're activated, we're not present, we're up in our head, we're not in our body, and then we can't learn anything from what's going on. And that is honestly the biggest thing in any work of deeper consciousness, deeper awareness, is being able to be present enough in the current moment that we can learn the lessons that are there for us in whatever's
mm-hmm.
happening. Be-
Yeah, exactly.
because that's 100 times more important than being the one who's better right now or trying to prove that I'm better or get defensive
Mm-hmm.
if I'm not. It's 100 times more important that we can see what the hell's going on, what we can learn
Mm-hmm.
from it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that frankly I think is because of how sensitive men are naturally, inherently, how easily hurt we are
Mm-hmm.
by chaos, by women,
Mm-hmm.
by our mothers. This sensitive heart that men are born with puts us in a state where we get wounded so easily and we put walls up so fast at such a young
Mm-hmm.
age that we can't ever admit that we're wrong. We're just
Mm-hmm.
so obsessed with being right because being wrong means we're bad. Being wrong means we're displeasing. Being wrong means that, it activates all of the wounded little boy energy in us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well said. Well said. I think about this word, two words that values that are strong for me is grace and grit. And I think of myself, do I have the grace when I don't know something to admit it? And then do I have the grit to get better at it and to learn? And so the combination of grace and grit is just a magic sweet spot. And it's truly a combination of humility and confidence. And it's not a humility that's like, oh, I'm a piece of shit kind of humility. It's a strong humility. It's a humility that's grounded and it's present and it's alive. And I have been terrible, god awful at being triggered and being
We all have.
upset and being lame in all the different ways. And I still have that happen. The big difference between me now and me before is that when I'm triggered, I'm fully aware that I'm triggered and I'm fully capable of bringing myself out of the trigger. And for me, it's a journey of that's the competence that I'm most interested in. That's the skill that become really the superpower, because once I get out of that, then I can learn and I can assess. And as long as I'm in that, I'm in lockdown and I have no capacity to grow and to learn. And so I feel like what I see with our women is that when they're exuding and doing these things from this energy that's may look on the surface like competence, but it's not fulfilling them, they're actually dying for us to notice that. They love it. They want to see us noticing that they're being triggered by the acts that they are doing these things. I think most women nowadays, like you said, at the end of their, overwhelm and a lot of these things, it's kind of the sort of the shadow side of a movement to empower women. And once you've empowered them and said, oh, be like men, and you get to do all these things, great, you can. Let's see how that all plays out and works. And I think it really brings up this attention that I've seen is, like you've mentioned, we've talked about the different times of the month, the different energy cycles, the different, this is not to say that women aren't capable of doing these skills, but it's like we've said, how is this going to affect your body? How is this going to affect your capacities? And can we get away from this idea that efficiency and productivity and speed And all of these things are morally better than uh, something that's not those things. The creative person is not always the most efficient person. If we're in a competition for efficiency, we will lose as human beings. We've got AI, they're far better than we are at being efficient, at being competent in most areas of life. So, what are exactly humans' capacity? Like, why are we even here? What are we even going to be bringing to offer this? This is where women become really vital because their potentialities as the feminine and the feminine, which you're going back to that oracle and that quality of those things, there is this wisdom, there's this innate knowing, but it's in their body, and it's in the connection with their body. And when they're disconnected from their body because they're so bent out of shape and being efficient and doing all these things from a competent space, they become disconnected, like you've said. And when we're disconnected from our body, the body can process something like a trillion, like so many things in a flash. Like we just know so much, way more than our mind can.
It's the
And our
deepest
body
wisdom.
has this wisdom, and women have this, but they're disconnected from that. So that competence that's out here is actually this surface levels, kind of shallow competence that's getting in the way of something that's much more attuned in our body. And if we can be attuned to when they're off, then we can kind of uncrack that code, crack that open. We have the capacity because they need to be witnessed in that, just as we are being witnessed in us, we witnessing them in that cracks them open into that space. And that becomes truly the gift that they can speak and live and act from that space. That's the divinity. That's where Rachel's becoming this. She's always been this, but this is like day in, day out. She's in this exuding this embodied sensuality and femininity that just, it's luscious. And it's she's mine. But
It's
it's not,
life-giving.
I'm not abusing it, or it's not something like, oh, this is great. It's just emanating and for the world to witness.
God, you said so much there. I could probably talk for a day just about what you about how deep everything you just said was. The You're not going to find very many people who disagree with the concept that we we ought to give women the opportunity to live the life they want. And if they want to pursue something, the opportunity, it's a human right to have the right to live your life the way you want to live it. But it does feel like women were in large part duped by feminism to think that they have to, versus just because you can, feeling like they have to go out and be something more productive, more like efficient than what they might be otherwise. And again, coming back to something we said earlier, just because you can doesn't mean that it's in your best interest, that it's right for you.
Mm-hmm.
And all day long, if you want to, great. But this is where when we get into these deeply intimate, deeply spiritual relationships where she's looking for something more, then how much can I do, and at what speed can I do it, and how much money can I make from it? When she's
Mm-hmm.
looking for something more out of life, to be able to say maybe less.
Mm-hmm.
The thing I would love to hear your opinion on, that I thought of when we were talking about this idea, is it seems to me, from my experience, that a lot of women develop their competence, their strength, their ability to be independent, to take care of themselves, more out of necessity
Mm-hmm.
than out of desire.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying about safety. It's this is how you survive in this world. This is how you make it. You conform to a paradigm and a way of being that actually goes against so much of their innate natural instincts. And this is kind of ironic. We're conscious, we're DOMs, but I'm going to call out the patriarchy here and the old school version of this, that there is a unhealth in contorting to a paradigm and a way of being that excludes an entire way, so much. And I feel like patriarchy is a myopic paradigm that is based upon certain values that are inherently destructive to feminine energy. And I do feel like feminine energy, when it's led and consciously dominated or consciously led, is life-giving and is much more expansive than a traditional sort of old school, that's the negative masculine kind of energy can hold. And so you will never be able to contain and hold the full bounty of feminine energy if you're going to do it from a place where you have to be the one that's more competent, where you have to be the one that's more knowing, more knowledgeable, more better, or whatever. And you have to see it in a kind of hierarchical kind of space. You have to get out of that. It almost has to be in this place where you're witnessing, you're bearing witness to this, you're witnessing and holding her, but it's from a place that allows her to shine, but you're synced with her. It's energy. Like there's an energetic space where she's allowed to be in her full glory, and you're witnessing and bearing witness to this and holding this, and there is a steering and mode of this.
The way
And
that I've said that, I want to jump in for a second there. The way that I've said that is, the more that I step into strength, the more that Dawn just naturally feels free. Like she can let go of control because she knows that I've got her. And then as that happens, her expression gets bigger. We've talked before about like holding her voice and encouraging her voice. Well, her voice gets bigger, her expression gets bigger, her sexuality gets bigger. Everything about her starts to expand. And my two choices are to act like, no, not quite that much. Not like that. Like I can't handle that. And to basically
right.
try to like tamp her down, or to grow with her, to grow, to contain and hold all of this bigger expression as she grows. And so for us, it's been like she goes and then I go, and then she goes and then I go. And
Yeah.
she gets more expansive and then I get stronger. And then because I get stronger, she gets more expansive. And because she's more expansive, I need to get stronger. And
Right.
we keep on calling each other to a higher and higher expression of ourselves.
Right.
And what that means for us is just like our everything about our life gets more abundant. Financially, our life gets more abundant.
Right.
Sexually, like the amount of fun we have, everything about our life just keeps getting better when we don't put when we don't try to put limits on how good this can be.
Right.
This is where
It's true.
David Dita in his 3 stages really ring true, because the old version that you were talking about, that's what he talks about as like stage 1 masculinity. This is just machismo. It's I'm better than you. It's the old caveman club her over the head and drag her back to the cave by the hair kind of dominance. And stage 2 is the more depolarized way of relating, where we're trying to be equals and same. And stage 3 being more what we're talking about here, which is really growing into depending on each other and flowing with each other and encouraging each other's best and highest expressions.
Right. And and I think one of the things that I found that's really interesting about being in this journey is that it's built-in growth. If you're doing this right, there is no way to do this without you growing. You're getting in this growth thing. I was just listening to a woman who's Beck is her name, and she's a life coach, kind of known. And she talks about these 3 different zones. There's just a real succinct way of talking about what we talk about, the trigger. She talks about the comfort zone, the learning zone, and the panic zone. And I like that. I thought that was really helpful the way she said that, that if we're in a we can only really grow and learn in the one zone, and that's the learning zone. And the panic zone, we can't learn. That's the triggered space. And if we're in the comfort zone, we can't learn. And most men kind of oscillate between the panic zone and the comfort zone. They get into panic triggered state, and then they flush back to the comfort zone.
Or
And the learning zone,
they numb
they
themselves with
numb.
substances
Yeah,
to
they
get
numb
back to
themselves to
comfort.
get back into the comfort zone. And so they're
Mhm.
going between these two places, and they don't go to the growth. And the growth of the learning zone, we have to feel safe there. We have to feel safe. We have to be in a space that we provide that safety for ourselves. So we can kind of push ourselves just a little bit without getting into that panic zone. And there's a real art to that. And that's where we have to be the source for ourselves, to be kinder to ourselves, to be gentler to ourselves, so that we can push the gentleness with ourselves. Its end game is actually to propel growth and to actually help us to be better and grow and move us forward. So there is something expansive in that quality. And fortunately, when you have, this is where I feel like so often most relationships that I've witnessed outside of the model that we're speaking about, so many women, when they're in a triggered state or in a space that's not in the surrender, they're in competition with their man. There's a sort of awesome, the panic zone, comfort zone, panic zone, comfort zone. They're not really in this other space of this learning zone, because the men don't feel safe to actually be in the learning zone because they're getting attacked. And so automatically puts them in a panic space, and then they go over to the comfort. And so this is where these relationships become kind of neutered, and they kind of are this mushy kind of energy, and you can see it and feel it when you're around them. Whereas, so go ahead. I can see where I've sparked something with you.
You have, because this gets called anxious avoidant.
Yes.
It
Yes.
It's where one person is trying to pursue the other one is shutting down, and then people hear about this. Oh, well, we're anxious and we're avoidant, so we just have to fix that and then we'll be secure. Well, this is all a symptom of a deeper problem. The reason we get anxious, the reason we get avoidant, this is why we talk, you and I, so much about we've got to go deep. We've got to go down to the level of why are we triggered? What is the wounded little inner child that is making us get anxious? It's making us get avoidant. But this is how people go back and forth between the zones, and the way you're talking about them is this is just people's triggers triggering each other, and then getting triggered by the trigger of the trigger. And
Yep.
and we're
And if
so
you
far
don't,
away from the truth, and
and
so
that's the
far away
one
from
competence,
groundedness.
that's the competence that you need your woman to have. If I was to ask a woman to have any competence, it would be around her capacity to understand her inner child, her capacity to trigger. She's in a constant state of trigger all the time and throwing shit your way. You can quiet that down, but if she doesn't have some capacity to do some of her own inner work, uh, that's a tough road to haul. You're going to be dancing around that, playing with that. You're not necessarily dancing around it. I mean, you can hold that and manage that, but it's going to limit your life,
Yeah,
and you're
you
going to
have to
have
be
to.
growing together.
Exactly.
Another thing that I've noticed with the competence that so many women have, because women are extraordinarily good at getting shit done. And I think in part this is the mother energy. When there's a child to be taken care of, she will find a way to take care of that child. She'll find a way
Yeah.
to support that child. And we live in a world that is so void of healthy, strong, heart-centered masculine strength.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of strength that she needs to let go of control. The
Mm-hmm.
kind of strength that she needs to be able to rely on someone other than herself. She needs to
Mm-hmm.
know that that's there. She's got to know that it's present
Mm-hmm.
in order to feel safe enough to let go for herself.
Mm-hmm.
But we live in this world that's so lacking in embodied, heart-centered masculine strength
Hmm.
that it has driven women to become increasingly competent, independent on their own, because what other choice do they have?
Hmm.
And this is where it is our duty as men to come into our strength, to do the emotional work, to heal our hearts, to drop our numbing and our shutting down and
Yeah.
really come into a place of just being good in ourselves, being strong in
Yeah.
ourselves, because so much of what we need from women is available right there if we were just strong enough to hold it.
Yeah. Beautifully said. And makes me think about, I just had this kind of phrase that came to me that so many women's competence stems from the shards and broken pieces of the incompetence of the men in their life, of the fathers
Perfect.
in their life. And so there's literally kind of born from a wounded place, from a triggered place. It's not their ideal. It's not their ideal. They're having to pick up the pieces of people that haven't shown up again and again and again. And so then, and they don't want to be the one having to do it at all. It's just the men around them are not showing up. And then when they show up, they get triggered if you show up in this way or that way. The whole thing's a shit show.
And
And I just,
this is why they end up so burned out and tired and
yeah,
exhausted.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
And none of it's healthy. I mean, it's not good for us as men. We don't feel good
No,
in that place.
no,
And she doesn't feel good. So like this is the seems like the whole of the Western world is burned out women who have had to take care of themselves because they couldn't rely on men, and
yeah,
numbed out, shut down men who are so hurt and who are so wounded and so just clamped down because they don't see or know or feel a purpose for themselves
yeah.
in
They don't feel
life.
appreciated. They don't feel
Right.
appreciated. They don't feel respected. So they shut down. And then the women are like, "What the fuck have you done to feel like?" They've done the men have done two things. The women have done 50, and the men are upset because they're not feeling appreciated about the two things that they've done. And the women are
Mhm.
looking at them like, "Are you even fucking kidding me?"
Yeah. But then at the same time, the women have moved into that masculine space out of
Yeah,
necessity,
100%.
but they've
And
moved into
so
that masculine space. And so now there's no room for men in that space.
exactly, exactly, exactly. It
And
makes
it's like,
total
it's not a
sense.
blame thing. It's both sides are absolutely fucked.
Yeah, and this is where if you don't talk about and figure out how to navigate all the different layers, this is where the 24/7 idea of polarity and competency and skills and all these things become really primary, because all these things become places of trigger. Why are women not orgasming in the bedroom? It is not about the bedroom. It's about everything that took place before they got to the bedroom.
Yeah. It's the rest of
It's
her life.
it's the rest of her life, and she's not able to release and relax and be in the state, because the rest of her day she's holding and juggling and holding so many different things, and he's triggered and she's triggered, and the whole thing becomes this dynamic where they're not able to really be that. And this is where this competency is a double-edged sword. That's why we have to sift it. It's not a blanket. It's not just like, oh, that's bad or that's good. It's like we have to pick these things up and look at them and bring awareness and consciousness to it, that there's always a downside and there's always an upside about any advancement or growth. And we have to be able to sift through that and be aware of that. And who's going to take on which responsibility? Where's this going to happen? How are we going to do this? And what's the mode and the energy from which we're going to do this stuff? And if we're not paying attention to our energy, we're going to become very competent, but from a resentful energy. That's no bueno. This is no good. This is not helpful for our sex life or for any kind of life.
And everything tends to get reduced to the black and white.
Yeah.
And everything in life is gray. We have to be able and willing to look at things with nuance, with awareness in respect to what's actually true in this
Yeah.
in this moment. We can't boil everything down to a checklist where there's just a right and a wrong way. And this is what people are doing, by the way, in culture where they're starting to see, oh, this whole way of relating between men and women that we've been trying to do here the last 30, 40 years, it's not working. So you know what we're going to do? Trad wife. We're going to do traditional relationship. We're just going to go back to the way we used to do it.
Yeah.
But they're just looking for a black and white answer to a gray problem
Right. Right.
because things weren't better just because it's different than what you experience now.
Right. Right.
And frankly, most people aren't equipped to live a life in a relationship the way that people did 50 years ago.
Right.
How many of
And that
these
didn't
guys who
actually
want to
work
be
50
in,
years ago.
no, it didn't work well at all. But how many of these guys who want a trad wife, who want to be in these like old school traditional relationships, how many of them are like, able to go out and work a 40-hour a week job that pays all the bills for a family of four or five or six? Like it, it doesn't work that way anymore. How many of these
Hmm.
guys can fix their own cars?
Hmm.
It, we aren't, most people aren't equipped as human beings to live that way anymore. And our culture and our economy and our money, don't even get me started on talking about economics on this podcast, or we will be here for a whole year talking about economics and money and how our money is fucked. But we just keep looking for these black and white, right and wrong, yes or no answers to questions that are so much deeper.
Hmm.
And that's why the only way we can really start to get to it is to get into a connection with one other person
Hmm.
and start to work on the nuance and the reality and the truth of this connection, of the intimacy that's present between us. And
Hmm.
where does she need to learn to let go? Where do I need to learn to step up?
Hmm.
And to do that continually with patience and compassion over a period of years and years and years together will give you a lifetime of challenge and growth and pleasure and fun and everything else.
And and accountability and confidence. I mean, at the end of the day, we as men, we need to feel confident. We need to believe in ourselves. We need to be able to feel good about ourselves and look in the mirror. And when you have a woman who sees you and lead as as her leader, as who respects you and sees your journey and sees you holding yourself and sees you moving through these things, you feel that it's rejuvenating, it's regenerating, and it changes you and alchemizes you.
Mhm. So, what I've had to do in our relationship is see the places where Dawn is maybe highly competent, highly able,
Hmm.
even very good at something, and where at the same time I see it burning her out. It's not lighting her up. It's not setting her on fire. It's not making her come alive. And I've had to be able to discern what is and is not right for her
Hmm.
and tell her more of this and less of that, or you're not
Hmm.
doing this anymore. You're going to devote your
Hmm.
time over here,
Hmm.
which does at times mean she's less helpful,
Yeah, exactly.
which has been
That's what
hard
I
for
was.
her because she loves feeling helpful. She loves one of the things that will light her up more than anything is if I tell her that she makes my life easier.
Hmm.
But I am not just here to have her make my life easier.
Hmm.
I want us to make each other's lives better.
Hmm. Yeah.
So it is one of the hardest things is, to your point, something where she is very competent, she's very capable, to tell her, you're not going to do that anymore.
Yeah.
That's not where I want you spending your time. Because what I tell Dawn is, you're mine first.
Right. And
You don't belong to all of these things. You belong to me.
competence is amoral, so to speak. It's asexual in the sense that it's neither feminine nor masculine. There are things that you can be very much in your feminine and be very competent, be very much in your masculine and be very competent. This is We often associate competence with more of a masculine energy, but you can be very, there's something quite exquisite about being in pure feminine energy and being very confident while you do it. And this is where I go back to that need to be attuned and attentive to the energy with which she's doing it, because that becomes the gauge, that becomes the marker. Can we retain that feminine space? Can we retain that flowing, open, rejuvenating, when you're just in her presence, and you just feel better. You get something from that. And as you said it really well, when you are lined up, when you're strength and you're strong, she comes in that way. She can feel you doing that work. She can feel you rejuvenated. She can feel you strong. And that comes from a place where you're not proving, it's not a proving energy. It's not you needing something from her. You're not needing, you really are your own self-generating space, and so the triggers become an opportunity to teach yourself something and to grow. They become a reveal so that you come out of it stronger. And that's the superpower. That's the true competence that all of this kind of stems back to.
And that's really what comes from helping to discern for her.
Yeah. And reflect that back to her.
Where is she most competent and most alive?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so she can spend her time doing things that don't burn her out.
Exactly.
But spend her time doing more and more of the things that make her come alive. And so she's not getting crashed constantly by having to go into energy that's taking her out of her aliveness. But if we can keep her in a life where she gets to live in more and more and more and more of that.
And that's why exactly. Well, we need her feedback. And if we're not strong enough to hold her feedback,
what can we do?
We're not able to improve. We're not able to lead because we're getting a false feedback. If she can't speak her truth to us, we're increasing her illness, her ailment, her part of her that's not in her flow. She's got to be able to reveal her truth and be in her truth with us.
Well, that's a great way to put a bow on it, because that's the full feedback and that's the full loop.
Right.
It's, her being in that ends up then getting to feed back to us.
Right.
Information.
Right.
And the information that we need to continue to lead her into better and better places in her life.
Truth.
That's the full loop. So great conversation as always today, Eric.
Thank you, Andrew.
Always appreciate these, and I look forward to sharing this one with everyone.
Yep. Appreciate you, Andrew. Thank you for today.